Quantity surveying is, in the traditional sense, is being a building economist. And that means the quantity surveyors understand the metrics of construction when it comes to dollars and cents. They're like the accountants, right? Hi, my name is Tuan Duong. You're listening to Property Investory Podcast.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast, Tuan. Well, firstly, maybe start off with showing the audience a little bit about yourself. Maybe just share with the audience your title, what you've done, and also feel free to brag about it.
Thanks so much, Tyrone. Appreciate you having us on today. So my name's Tuan Duong. I'm the principal and founder of Duo Tax Quantity Surveyors. Duo Tax Quantity Surveyors is a property tax depreciation expert firm. We specialize purely on advising on property tax depreciation for property investors who want to maximize the amount of tax deductions possible from their investment property. And that's where my journey comes in, is that I found a lot of value in this, and hence it's my now lifelong pursuit to help others unlock these tax deductions that I wasn't aware of a long, long time ago.
Nice. It's always great to be able to unlock a secret behind it. I don't know if I could probably say it's a secret, but there's so many things involved with regards to tax, and no one has the time except for you guys.
Exactly.
So tell me a little bit more about, Tuan, what your kind of day-to-day is. Just share with us, maybe in 60 seconds, what you're currently doing every day.
Certainly. So with Duo Tax Quantity Surveyors, Tyrone, is the company has grew from a one-man band. I was literally a one-man band when I started this business 5 years ago. And so when you start out, I was mostly looking after trying to grow the business in the sense of sales. Also the technical know-how. I was very limited in what I knew about depreciation when I had started, because it was quite a new thing to me. As much as I knew the fundamentals of it, but being able to implement technical data into a system that could be replicated to our customers in a very big scale, I had to, grow the business from there with limited resources in terms of trying to build Excel spreadsheets. And then so the next day, the part of that day would be to find more sales to sustain some traction in terms of financial growth. And so that was my day-to-day running of the business when I first started. And then it became, looking for staff here and there when I could afford it. But nowadays, we've got a team now that a sort of sales support team that help clients and customers get the most out of what our product offers. So that means I'm training staff in terms of sales, but also technical. And I'm also always trying to bring on board new staff to join our business as I'm always trying to be in a growth phase. We're very much in a growth phase of our business. And so we're always looking for ways to build efficiencies as well into our day-to-day activities. And so that forms most of my day today. So relatively different to what it was 5 years ago. But I guess that's the journey of every business owner, and evolving to somebody that, you're doing the things that you love to do. And the things that you can't do, or you find too hard, and like bookkeeping, you outsource that, and thank God for that.
I hate bookkeeping, to be honest. I mean, that's why I've outsourced it. I just don't have. I mean, I'm okay with it, and I love my numbers and stuff like that. It's good to actually be on top of it, keep a pulse of it. But every day to day, kind of thing, it is quite what's called a monotonous task, to be honest. So it has to be done, but I think it's for the people who are passionate and are really good at it, all the CPAs and stuff like that.
Yes.
So,
leave it to the experts.
Leave it to the experts, exactly.
And that's
all right.
Yep.
Well, Tuan, let's take a step back, and I think I'd love to get to know you a little bit more personally, and just understand and learn a little bit about your history. So let's jump back. Let's start off with where did you grow up?
So I'm a second generation Australian. Mum and dad had left Vietnam by boat back in 1984. And so by the time 86, they had made their way to Australia and settled here. And I was born in Auburn back in 1986. Brings me to 34 years young this year. But I grew up most of my life in Cabramatta, which is one of the western suburbs of Sydney. And so through there, I went to school at a local Catholic school there, which I then eventually moved to further out west to a suburb called Bonnyrigg, where I schooled at another Catholic high school there. And that was my journey. And then from there, you know, sort of got brought up in the Western Sydney area. And so I saw a lot of geographical change for one, and also I guess the type of, you know, the economy just thrived from stride to stride over the course of, you know, 30 years before I moved down to the area where I'm based now in the west of Sydney. But certainly it taught me a lot about, I guess, the demographic of that area, that ever changing. And I think still today, I'm very associated with the Western Sydney. I'm in the running for the Western Sydney Awards for Business Excellence for 2 categories. So I'm very much aware of what it is and what's happening in that area, especially with things like the airport and the ever-changing demographic. And it's just expanding at a increasing rapid rate. And to be honest, I invest in that area for that very reason. I only hold property in the west of Sydney. I'm a big believer. So yeah, definitely.
That's fantastic. And I'm very much, I resonate with you in terms of growing up, because I grew up around that area as well too. And over a number of years, my parents just decided to move back into the inner west, which is where I grew up as well too. So very similar story.
Some similarity for sure.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. So I guess you went to school around Bonnyrigg, and then after that, and Cabramatta and so forth like that, you grew up around that area. At what stage did you actually go through say high school as well around those areas, and then you went into university after that? Like, what was your journey behind that too?
For sure. And going from in high school, I very much had an interest in business. You know, economics, business studies. That was sort of where I was very much interested in trying to grow myself and understand that side of things. And the reason for that is my mum and dad, being sort of first generation here, they Vietnamese. They ended up starting up Vietnamese restaurants for themselves. So they were always working for themselves for most of my young life. And so I always, I really looked up to them for that, which meant that, going from there, I ended up moving into uni. Once we finished school, I went to study finance and mathematics, which was something I thought that I would have interest in, but not to be. And the funny thing about that is, I think many I hear now is that, it's not always, the first pick is not always the end pick. And I ended up dropping out of university to work with mum. And so I said, you know what, I wasn't excited about uni. I went to work with mum at a restaurant, at our family restaurant, for a short period when we started doing fit outs. And that's where I came across someone that was undertaking construction or project management of our fit out. And I said, what did he study? He said to me, construction management. And so I thought, oh, well, this is amazing. Like, I can't believe the diversity in his role and how much of an interesting role he had to play in the fit out and construction process of that. And I thought, well, you know what, it's something I wouldn't mind doing. So I took that up as my journey to go into construction management. And that's where I sort of got my background to become a quantity surveyor, because part of that degree allows you to be a quantity surveyor. And I would say, limited interest in quantity surveying. It wasn't the most exciting subjects at uni. But what I found at a later stage throughout life is when I came across investing in property, which my mum and dad always sort of pushed me towards. And thank God, it's always as someone that gives you a bit of a shove in the back to say, you got to get going. You can't be spending your money at the club, at the pub, or whatever it might be, having a good time with your friends. It can only take you so far. So that's when I started investing in property. And my accountant said to me, well, Tuan, investing in property means you should be able to claim depreciation. And that means going to see a quantity surveyor to help you get the most out of your rental property and claim some depreciation. I said, well, I studied quantity surveying in school. And he said, well, no, you've got to actually go see a qualified quantity surveyor that's got the expertise in providing this type of advice that gives me, the accountant, a report to say this is how much you can claim in depreciation, which then in turn is a tax deduction, and that was lowering my taxable income that each financial year for up to 40 years on my brand new townhouse that I bought. And for me, it was like, this is a no-brainer. I can't believe how much value I was getting out of it. I mean, I was on a basic $60,000 income back in 10 years ago when I graduated. I thought, I've got this rental property. I've got $15,000 tax deduction in the first year, and it was like a $7,000 refund. And I just could not believe it. So, and then there was a no-brainer. I was like, if I'm getting this sort of value, and I can't believe how many people don't even know about this. And I thought, well, this is I've got to go help others do it. Why not? Let's unlock let's unlock this secret to thousands of other investors based in Western Sydney and probably based all over Australia, like I was, that don't know about this, And so it's been rewarding to meet that many people that I'm able to help.
Fantastic. Awesome. All right. Well, what I'd love to find out a little bit more now is you went on this amazing journey to be able to start investing into property. You learned so much from your accountant as well too, and quantity surveyor to be able to get that kind of knowledge. At what stage did you actually decide to go, okay, this is the time to jump in and start my own business? Because obviously you've been working with mum and you're getting some experience working in this construction and studying and then, all that. Did you do anything in between that time? Because I'm just trying to picture or put together the puzzles. Like when you start working with mum, what happened after that?
Yeah, so I was, a university, didn't quite finish, ended up working with mum where she was constructing a new restaurant. This was at the age of probably, I think it would have been 21, 22 at that time. Then I went to a 4-year degree to study construction. I graduated. I worked in construction for 5 years or 4 years post-grad. I had a couple of years under my belt while I was studying as well. So that's where I sort of in construction, but I wasn't on the quantity surveying side. And quantity surveying is, in the traditional sense, is being a building economist. And that means the quantity surveyors understand the metrics of construction when it comes to dollars and cents. They're like the accountants, right, of the construction world. So they're independently advising to the bank, the council, the tax office on what exactly is the construction cost for a certain type of building. Right, every nut and bolt, working out square meters of concrete, plasterboard, the labor, manpower required, and what that means in terms of dollars and cents for a construction project. And that's what a quantity surveyor would do to provide that independent advice, whether you're a developer or whatnot. So when I was growing up, I was doing construction, civil construction, that was building roads, bridges, that sort of work post-grad. And after about 4 years, it was in that period where, I had worked with mum and to get into the construction degree. But then while I was working, I then saved up enough money to buy my first investment property. Of course, at that time, I'm such a big, passionate person when it comes to cars and things like that. But mum said, mum, dad said, no, this is not the way. You've got to grow wealth. And the way to grow wealth, from what they knew, because they were first generation settlers, migrants, they knew that, very limited education for them, but they knew that in Australia, property just had its merits when it came to wanting to build wealth. They didn't know about shares, so I never really got inspired or really educated about shares and how to buy shares and where to put your money. But property was one of those things, and it still is today. Like I've seen lots of migrants and their children go ahead and buy property. And even their parents are buying property. Like my parents, they didn't have a lot of money to buy property or invest in property, but they knew that. And it's something that they always wanted for their kids. So, and my first investment property, they chipped in a bit. And so I chipped in a bit to buy my first rental property. And that's when it became evident to me that this is something you need to do, you need to have. And so once I organized a report, bought a property, organized a report, it was a no-brainer. I decided that, what, this is really important. Like I can't believe how much value this adds. So then to be honest with you, it's not that easy starting out. You always have a bit of an ooh and ah moment. Oh, should I, could I, what if? I was always, every year as a professional, as most probably people out there listening know, in your professional career, if you're in that career, you always got this opportunity to increase your wealth by, that pay rise and that little bit more. And that always kept me back. It always kept me back from wanting to, having that drive to leave work and say, you know what, I need to take initiative here and start my business if I'm really driven to do so. And so that was at the age of, I would say 26. I think I was 25 or 26
Wow.
when I bought my first property at 25, 26, which was about $400,000. And it was a Western suburbs townhouse. It was brand new. And then from there, it took me about 2.5 years to really say, you know what, I'm going to do it. So I had a big holiday one time with a couple of mates, came back and said, that's it. I've got to leave. And I was at a good place in my career, but 2 years of oohing and ahhing and, wondering, I put that curiosity to rest, and I took that leap of faith, and I started to fly solo, as they say, and never looked back. But once I started though, I resigned from my construction engineering role. I then went into a quantity surveying firm, and there I actually offered them to, I said, look, I'm going to work for you for free. I just want to work. I just want experience. And so I worked there for a period of, I think, just over 12 months. And I worked for 2 other employees at the same time. So I was employed in 3 different jobs, in 3 different quantity surveying jobs. I'd work for someone on the weekdays. I'd work for another person, like doing contract work on the weeknights. And on the weekends, I would be out doing inspection for tax depreciation with one other employer. So I was keen, to say the least. So that's where after 12 months, I said, you know what, I really am eager to start. The market was so hot back in 2015. I knew I just had to get out there and meet investors. I didn't know how. I did do some what they do, call a survey. I decided to do a bit of R&D, if you can call it that.
Yeah.
I asked my mum and dad's accountant. I said, hey, my accountant, my personal accountant, which was a guy sort of local to me in Canley Heights, he said, he'd said, yeah, of course I'd refer you. And I spoke to my mum and dad's accountant, who I had obviously a relationship with. I said, oh, would you refer me clients if I started doing tax depreciation? He said, of course I would. And that was for me enough for me to say, I'm going to give it a crack.
That's awesome.
So that's how it started for me. And that was back in 5 years ago. So it would have been 28 when I started. And so it was about, so there's a few years there of working, of oohing and ahhing. And then over about, I think it was about 14 months of career work inside a quantity surveying firm, a couple of quantity surveying firms. And then that's when I started at the age of 28 to start my own business. Now, my business was not all that glorious. It was started in my parents' house. So they had a little study, and that's where I sort of started up. And I'm sure a lot of people can resonate when they're listening to you on this podcast, working from home, thinking, right, this is exactly the type of office you can start in. You don't need anything more special than this. You just need a telephone. And I remember I created a business card. And my business card was, I designed it myself because I was quite savvy with AutoCAD and being able to use Adobe software. So I created a business card, and I thought it was quite, beautiful. And I said, I need a landline and make it look professional. So I said to my mum, do you need that fax line that we have at home? And she goes, no, it's all yours. You can go for it. So I switched that fax line to a landline, and then I put into the card, and that became my landline for the business, and with my phone number as well. And then I went into some networking events that some friends had told me about, and I just started selling. And you wouldn't believe when you start the amount of people that you don't know will give you a chance in life.
Yeah.
There are so many of them out there that are just willing to give you a chance if you can just be honest with them. I don't know everything, but I'm making a start, and it's a very important thing, because it's always that fear of like, oh, am I good enough? Do I really know what I'm doing? Just start. And people will have faith in you, especially if and you will make mistakes. So there's going to be reports that don't seem quite right, and the accountant has to come back and tell you this is not right, and that I've had a lot of that feedback over the years, and even today, I prepare reports, and there's always someone critiquing my reports that are really, really interested in the way it looks or the way it presents. And they say, oh, it'd be nice if you had this or you had that. And so it's an ever-changing process, and you're always growing. And that's what helps you perfect what you do. And when you only do tax depreciation, you become really, really good at it. especially in the scale that we do it now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating too, because I think with tax depreciation, there's a huge benefit. You've already got something in advantage for you, because the thing is you're giving money back to the investor or whoever is actually a developer or whatnot. And when you actually think about it, you guys are providing a fantastic value, because I recently got a tax depreciation done on one of my properties.
Yep.
And I was like, wow, that money itself that I paid was just worth more than, what I'm getting back in return for it. So I think it's a no-brainer for me, to do it.
Yeah, and
So
then I think it's very suiting to my characteristic, because I've never been a salesman. I've been a technician all my life when it comes to construction cost estimation, working as an engineer, and so having to provide a product that you don't have to truly like dig deep to sell, it almost sells itself. It's so natural for my characteristic, and so I felt like inclined that this is something that I could actually confidently do without much trouble. And today, I'm, as much as I train staff to sell, I tell them, look, you don't need to sell it. Don't need to sell yourself. It's almost like you just tell them, inform them of how much value you can offer them in terms of a product. And that will resonate through to them, and it should sell itself in that regard. So it's not like you're going to have to sell pens to
yeah.
That's right. So very different to a Jordan Belfort sort of session of sales.
Absolutely. Well, the good thing is that as long as it's providing benefit, a value, it pretty much is just about informing and providing information. Because I think most of the market now, coming from an investor's background, is that we're quite educated, because we have so much information available at the fingertips. We can actually access this. And all we really want is just a comfort and reassurance that the job or the product that we're getting is going to actually work. I mean, you read reviews and stuff all online, you can find out the information. But the thing is, at the end of the day, for my experience, is that we want to be able to connect with someone who actually understands what we want and understands and listens and values what we need. And as long as they can deliver on that, everyone's happy to do business with each other. So
I certainly agree. I have to agree with you.
excellent. Well, what I'd love to have a further discussion about, I was very intrigued when you talked about your parents saying that they encouraged you to invest into property at a very young age as well, especially at that. Did they actually have their own portfolio already established? Because I'm trying to understand, where did this motivation and drive from I guess your parents' generation to actually recommend to buy properties? Because I mean, it could be from an Asian background, because that's what
Same thing.
Yeah. But at the same time, I'm just really interested to understand where your parents' mindset was, because, they're a very hardworking family. As you said, they weren't educated as much as we were in our generation. But where did that drive come from to say, look, Tuan, you've got to get property?
I wrote an article about this not long ago, especially for some of the awards that we've been finalists and listed for, and it talks about like where's the drive come from, and it resonates with me because when our parents come here, education is so limited. The only thing that they know is what others are doing, and when I look at my closest aunties and uncles, they were all doing that. They were all trying to save money, buy property. And for mum and dad, it wasn't actually buying property. Like they bought a rental property years ago, and I think it was back in the early 2000s, and they had not done very well out of that rental property. So if anything, it was probably a little bit discouraging for them on that first rental property that had ever bought. And of course, interest rates were high and all those sort of things that factored into it, that wasn't going their way. And then come 2008 or 9, they interest rates started to drop. And this is where my mum said, mum and dad said, well, let's start buying property for our kids. So all their savings, the business was never, it was successful to some extent, but not enough for them to have a thriving portfolio of properties. But it was always a passion for them, because they knew that everyone else is doing, so there must be something with this, right? That people are doing, that they're doing right. And it could come down to where she bought. I mean, it wasn't the best or glamorous suburb that she bought her first rental property, but when she bought, she helped my sister with the first property that my sister bought. It was in a thriving area known as Canley Heights, and at that time, interest rates were low, and it was just a great place to start. And I think that's when the property started. Property talking just. For us, we were surrounded by it. Everyone's talking about property in late 2000, close to 2010. And when I bought my first property, I think it was 2010, that's when it became a thing, right? And it just sort of was filling our space when it came to, and friends were buying it, and I think it was all to do with the affordability of property too, being interest rates were low, lower than usual, and of course, being able to, the flexibility of banks, I think at that time was vastly different to the era before that. So in terms of background, it wasn't something that we had a lot of experience in, but for me, it's been bit of a learning curve, and being able to meet people, even like yourself, Tyrone, that helps, because then you start listening to people like, I had a lot of people in our family that were mortgage brokers. Our family had, there was a few establishments in businesses there, and we thought, well, it's always resonating about property and how, easy it is to lend money at that time. And it only got easier, if anything,
Yes.
for most part, right? And that's where my journey started.
Yeah, that's amazing to be able to hear that. And I think it really, really is very eye-opening to be able to hear that, because when families migrate from overseas, especially to try and settle in Australia, as you said, interest rates were very high. And you kind of think to yourself, is it really worth it to buy property? But obviously over that long term, they understood the effect of compounding, the effect of actually just holding long term. And look where our properties are, nowadays.
That, that's exactly right. And I've got this mentality. Mum and dad have always, as much as they rented when they first settled in Australia, from there, they've always bought the houses they live in. Like, they've always bought and never had this idealism of like renting is bad, right? But there's always an economy for both. But, that based on that ideology, I ended up realized, like, for myself now, when I buy, even on my own businesses, I will buy the proper premises that I occupy the space in.
Of course.
So it's almost ingrained in us that it's the way we should be. Like, and now every time I move out of an office, this is our third office that we've grown into. We've bought every office that we've occupied, and all because I've got this stigma that you need to own or occupy the premises, and all we've got now, we accumulate these commercial properties in the process.
That's amazing.
Not a bad thing at all.
Absolutely a good thing, actually. It's very positive as well. Fantastic. Well, let's talk a little bit about then your property journey. I'd love to delve into that and start off initially. You mentioned you bought your first property when you were 26. Is that right?
I think it was 2010, so 24.
24. Okay.
Yeah, 24.
Okay.
So I was a couple of years graduated by then, saved enough money to help with the deposit, and that's where it started for me. 24.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit more about that. I'm pretty sure that probably you remember that quite well, because it's your first ever property. What was that property? What was the memories behind it?
Yeah, so the first property wasn't through a buyer's agent, wasn't that fortunate. It was sort of like, we know the area. It's always that, isn't it? Your property, when you start out, it's you buy somewhere where you're comfortable, right? And you think there's real good aspects to it, and there's a real opportunity for a capital growth. You think this is a thriving area. The demand was crazy in the area of Canley Heights. I'm not sure if the listeners know where Canley Heights is, but definitely it's a very Asian centric community, similar to Cabramatta, but it's a little bit more upmarket in terms of it has a little bit more space, not as dense, but really thriving restaurants at that time. And it started to become something. And I'm not sure if you go there today, it's just impossible to drive through Canley Vale Road.
It's thriving.
It's a thriving little area. And so it ticked all the boxes for us, because we were so familiar with the area. We knew it was getting busy. It had great restaurants. People wanted to be there, daytime, evenings. And so it was just an amazing place to invest. And so I bought the first investment property in Canley Heights back in 2004. 2010, sorry. And that's when I started having to delve into what are things that you can claim, what are things you can't claim, expenses, what's depreciable. And that's the advice I started getting with an accountant. It's the first time I ever had to engage an accountant. Well, it was years before that. I would used to get my accounting mate to sit next to me and try to, tick and flick some boxes on my e-tax and try to do a tax return. But I think at that stage, once you invest in your first property, that's when it's such good value. And thank God that I did. And obviously through the advice of mum and dad, and even my sister, who had bought a property the year before, and she said, look, you need to go see an accountant. So I did. And that was the best advice ever. And for me, like, it's a no-brainer. Whatever that $150 or $250 worth of tax expense seeing a tax agent, it provided immense value, because then you learn about depreciation, you learn about council rates, you learn about what you can claim on water rates, usage, and things like that. So things like that, I was very blessed to start that journey. And from 2010, I didn't buy any more property until 2015, when I started my business. And I wasn't very savvy, and had, obviously in that 5 years, I sort of, understood capital growth, and then I refinanced my house, my first rental property, to buy my second. And this is where I have to sort of slow down, but explain that the second property I bought was through more of a project marketing company. I bought an apartment in Queensland, and now looking back, it's probably one of my downfalls of investing in property. And I was taken to a property seminar, and I was sold a dream. I'm sure many people out there can resonate with this. And so I made a bit of a mistake where I bought that property in 2015, and I sold that property in 2019 at a bit of a loss. I sold it for exactly what I bought it for, but of course, there's things like stamp duty that you have to consider, and holding costs over the 3 years. And it took a couple of years to build, but by the time it was built, it was something I just didn't want to let go of. And for some people, other people that bought in the same premises that I knew, they were all about the hold and see where it goes. But it wasn't for me. For me, I thought, you know what, it's equity that I could release and I could do better things with. And I ended up doing exactly that. And you've got to make that call sometimes. I think when you're investing in property, and sort of sitting and holding seems to be easy to do, but in truth be told, is that money can always be spent better spent elsewhere. And that's exactly what I did. And I now have a couple of investment properties that I ended up buying in 2019 out west, in areas like Austral and Jordan Springs. I really truly believe in these areas because Sydney has all the right recipe for growth, and the demand for property and the demand for land in Sydney I feel, is ever changing. And out of those, just the last 12 months, I've seen, I think, more than 10% growth in just these areas and it's taken me almost a year to build, and to build growth while it's building is a no-brainer. I like new. Yes. My first investment property was brand new, and so I've had this stigma that I want to buy brand new because of the low maintenance. And in my position of being a business owner, I don't want to be dealing with problems such as mechanical or whatever it might be, drainage issues. So I've just bought brand new properties from the get-go, and they seem to be very, very good in terms of having to spend time on it and having a property manager to manage it without any sort of intervention from me, which is fantastic for me. And having that growth of 12 to 15% over the last 12 months has been amazing. Probably a little bit exaggerated because of the builder's grant now. And everybody's demanding properties that are brand new, especially house and land. It's just crazy, but that's not a bad thing. People want to get ahead out in these western regions. I grew up out west in Cecil Hills. That's where I ended up living with mum and dad for the latter part of my life, being with them. I grew up in Cecil Hills, which is sort of surrounded by Badgerys Creek, Austral, and that's the reason why I've invested there, because I really believe that community around there, they are all about that house and land, owning your own home dream. And if they want to own, areas where people owner occupiers, I think are great for investment, because people aspire to live there. And so there's people that want to rent there. They're willing to pay rent to be there. So, and that's what I found. And for what is a strange economy, I finished construction on one of my premises in just this year around mid-year, and I was able to get tenants in there in the first couple of weeks after occupation certificate was received, which means that it's, despite the economic conditions, it's still got huge demand, which is great.
Totally. And what I was going to add as well too, you've hit something really well as well, because building brand new and offering and finding tenants, you get a high quality tenant, because a lot of tenants want to get a new, because when you think about it, to actually own a brand new place is quite expensive, but to actually rent out is quite still affordable for people who can actually potentially purchase and build, but they just don't want it, because at this point in time, cash flow could be an issue, deposit could be an issue, but it attracts a better quality tenant. And I can one for say, I like to actually move into a new one, especially when a majority of the ones that we've been renting in the past have been pretty much new, so that's the reason why, we're happy to pay a little bit more extra rent. It might be only $50 extra a week, but you get a better quality place and also to less maintenance. And we're the same as tenants. We want to make sure that's low maintenance for us because we're quite busy. We've got a lot of things happening, and it really, really resonates with us by having these new ones. So I think it's
not to mention depreciation.
I was going to say exactly that. All right. Well, it's phenomenal to be able to hear you've done successfully well in terms of actually purchasing properties in those areas. You've mentioned as well that first or second property that you purchased, which was up in Queensland. Would you consider that being one of your worst investing moments, or did you have another one that you wanted to share?
Yeah, it's probably one of the most significant ones for me, because it probably was one of my worst investment choices, and because of purely not being educated, being sold a dream, through directly with this project marketing company, and not knowing what else to do. And at that time in 2015, was it 2015? Yeah, just probably 2013, 14 maybe. That's when I first put my interest in, before they started construction in 2015, 16. So around 2014 was when I made that decision. But at that time, property market, if you remember, Tyrone, was really on top. It was right at its peak. And I would say, and so like properties like spruiking was everywhere. Everywhere you turn, people were talking about property. I was receiving emails and letters and everything from everyone, agents, buyers agents, like, should I buy brand new in sort of small boutique type apartments or units or townhouses, or should I be buying these dense, apartments in sort of Newstead, which is where I bought an apartment in Newstead, and had all the right attributes from what they would sell. But over time, I realized that, in that amount of time from 2014 to 2018, there would have been so many opportunities that I've missed out. And that's the opportunity cost of making that wrong decision and not being educated and informed. And I think the places I wish I had known about things like the Property Investor podcast at that time, there were those independent places where you could get advice and not have to make that mistake. Being educated about that, jumping on Property Chat was something I've only done in the last few years, and I wish I had known about it much earlier, because everybody on there would talk about it. It was a thing, like people are selling, the dream, and it was the BS dream, and it was very painful because of how much I knew I had to forego making that decision. Now that, all in hindsight, of course. And so it's a very big learning curve, is that there are places like this where you can learn where to make good choices. And obviously not telling anyone how to make a choice, but gathering as much information as you can before you make those decisions and go down the wrong road.
Totally. And I think that's the thing. I mean, for every single journey and every single story I've heard and interviewed and done so forth, including myself, is that the biggest learning lesson out of this is that it helps you understand. Because if you don't go through those experiences, if you don't make a mistake here and there, you don't really learn. You think you might be on a high, sitting on a pedestal and thinking, great, I'm succeeding, I'm doing really well. But it's only when you actually make those mistakes that you actually learn the lesson to be able to help you grow. And I can resonate with that because I've gone through some mistakes here in my journey as well. And because of those mistakes and those learning lessons, I've been able to improve and make better changes for the future, changing, the opportunity cost, looking at how I can actually improve properties and so forth like that. So I think it's a great thing because we can share and we can learn from each other. And through those learning lessons, we want to try and mitigate and minimize the amount of risks that we have as well too. Yeah, it's great that you share that. So along that journey as well too, could I find out as well, how many properties do you currently have in your portfolio?
At the current time, I have 6 properties, all based in Sydney.
Yep.
It's a mixture of commercial and residential. Commercial, sort of something I just came across because of the necessity of my pathway. But I've been so fortunate with that, in that investing in commercial properties, because when I had first started the business, my first office was a rental office out of my accountant's office. So he subleased a room. You wouldn't believe it, but I was paying $75 a week
Wow, that
for
is
a
awesome.
room in Canley Heights to operate my business. So it was very lean, but very fortunate to come across people that would allow that. And you know, you've got to start somewhere. It wasn't the most glamorous office, you know, had a few bug issues, but you know, that's where you start. And from there, once we had to vacate that premises based on size, and we were growing at that time. I bought my first commercial property in Newington, which is based in Sydney. And that at that time I paid $440,000 for that. And it would be hard pressed to find something that's 10 years old for that price today. That's about 150 square meters. But I was very fortunate to start our office there. Our first office we moved into, did a beautiful renovation, and we've moved out of there again, only recently to move into another office in Homebush, which we're situated in now, which is a beautiful technology park next to DFO here in Sydney. But that's where we're based, and so you know, it's a mixture of things. Buying property for your own purpose, and I've always had that, you know, impression that if I bought something, and it's my philosophy still, would I want to live there myself? And the answer is yes. If I wanted to go to Jordan Springs, if I wanted to go to Austral, I actually want to live in these areas. If I wanted to go to Canley Heights, I'd love to live in those areas. And same goes for work. If I wanted to work, where do I want to work? I think, you know, being in the city is very expensive to buy property there. It's a great place, but it's not necessary. People aren't so critical about where you are based these days. And having an office in Homebush allows all of my staff who come over from all sort of areas from Sydney. We congregate here in Homebush, which is where our head office is, and it's a convenient place. You know, we've got the West Connects, got great tunneling everywhere. I'm losing track of the amount of tunnels in Sydney now, but it just means that it adds value to your property because it's reachable, it's attainable, you can get there, and so it has all the right boxes ticked for what a commercial property should do.
Absolutely.
And I've always aspired to being in these areas myself. It's a very beautiful sort of precinct we're in now. So yeah, I'm a big believer that you know, you should buy where, you know, you would want to be if you believe that it's a great property. And I guess that's a very common thing because, you know, you look at you know, even a lot of people I know, they're buying property always. Like, I've got clients in Guildford in Sydney, and when I look at their 10, 15, 20 property portfolio, they're all around Guildford. So it's crazy, right? They grow in Guildford, they buy property, and they do so well for themselves, and it's amazing. So
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Like, if you know the area well, it's actually good because you've done your due diligence and your research. And especially in Sydney, there's still so much demand and not enough supply, which is the reason why I guess property prices continue to rise from that side of things as well too.
yeah, 100%, certainly so.
Yep.
All good. Yep.
All right, yeah. So what I was just saying was, it's fascinating. I guess a lot of investors, you know, look at once they start actually knowing the area, they become an area expert. They end up buying a lot more, especially when they're actually able to, I guess, develop in those particular areas. There's a lot of growth potential, especially like Guildford. You know, around the Western Sydney, there's still a bit of land there that's reasonably priced that you can actually do some development and increase. And especially when you're building brand new, there's a lot of depreciation benefits, which I think you know quite well.
Certainly. Yeah.
So yeah, I can see the reasons why they do that as well. So
Yeah.
it's fantastic that you shared with us that, you know, I've got a mixture of commercial and residential, because not many investors actually do that. Majority of the investors I've had on the podcast mostly have residential properties. But I'm just curious a little bit more about your aha moment. You know, tell us along that journey when you've actually gone through, which part of your journey do you think you just had this amazing aha moment that everything just clicked for you?
I think it has to be Canning Heights. It's a property I haven't let go of. I mean, I bought that property for 400,000. It's probably worth double that now. The duplex I bought, and so for me, that was an aha moment. Like, oh my God, you know, seeing that, purchasing a property, and then I guess when you first purchase it, you don't think a lot. You think, okay, well, I'm new to this. I'm not quite well versed at this. But as time goes on, and seeing that capital growth and how little it costs to maintain a property, it then explains it's almost self-explanatory that, hey, this is a really good vehicle for you to drive wealth. And that's when it said to me, well, this is it. Like, this is what I've got to do. This is what I've got to aspire to do. And so as time went on, I just stopped buying the cars and I stopped buying the flashy, nice things and going out less, and then realizing that, saving money is going to take me a long way. And that's when I decided in 2014, well, 3 or 4 years later, that, you got to keep going. There's other people out there that keep going, and you start to learn. Your broker says, your mortgage broker says, well, you can do this. And they open up this whole window of opportunity for you to say, it doesn't have to stop. It's not one, because the insight, at myself, philosophy was thinking it, I would think, you could only afford one, and I think most majority of Australian investors today, I think it's a massive percentage of people that actually only have one investment property throughout the whole life. And so having an opportunity to buy more, it didn't seem realistic. But then as I went through life, it made me think, okay, well, you can have more than one. You can have two, you can have three. And now I've seen it in other clients that do it. And I think, wow, amazing. Not that we get it very often. We don't get a lot of clients that are return customers that come by depreciation schedules for the second, third, fourth time. But there are people that out there that do have that. And, and so it's definitely a possible. And it's nice to see other people doing, because it helps you break through. When you see other people, it's a pattern that you think, oh, well, you know what? If they can do it, I can do it too. And that's a great mentality to have, I think.
It's inspiring, because that's the thing. I'm the same. I grew up thinking, my parents only owned one property. Dad at most had two.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, gosh, we just pay off a home and that's it, end of story. But then as you know, I've interviewed hundreds of investors, and I'm like, investors having 10, 20, 30, even up to 200 properties. Like, wow.
Yeah. It's so inspiring, and it's crazy. An accountant I know is sort of on that as well. He's doing 100, 200 properties. I think it's just amazing. I'm like, well, how do you even manage it? And then he's also got a business. And the reason why I'm so limited with property is that I've spent so much of my time invested in the business and reinvesting in the business. But to manage 100 properties and like 10, 20, 30 staff, I take off my hat to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's inspiring as well to hear and learn from these guys, because I think obviously the cash flow, the profits that you generate from the business, you plow it back into your either business or a property. It's either one, but you learn from these guys, and they just have amazing, yeah.
Amazing, to say the least.
Amazing, to say the least. Absolutely. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit more about, I guess, your strategy, and also maybe a why. So maybe let's just firstly start off with why. Why did you want to purchase more properties? I know you've touched on about, inspiration from parents and growing up and so forth, but currently in this point in time, what's been your main driving why factor?
As starting out, you're right. It's that it was very basic in that, mum said it's a good idea, I should start it. And then when I realized it, I think, well, capital growth is important, because, gaining capital is what you want to do in life to free yourself at some stage for retirement. And so now at a mature stage in investing in property and being a business owner, and obviously at the age of 34, I'm starting to think about the future, right? So future planning. And for me, property is a vehicle that's going to help me grow wealth, to eventually, I see it as a way to build a portfolio, and hopefully I can pay down debt. If I can help over time to debt recycle my properties and use and leverage property to start paying each other off, and have these properties that hopefully at some stage at the retirement age of 65 or 67, that I have a couple of unencumbered properties that will be the vehicle of retirement for me, and not have to rely on the pension and things like that, that I want to be self-sustaining, and eventually have a vehicle of 3, 4, 5, or 6 properties, hopefully unencumbered, and they will then be the vehicle to help me sort of through my retirement phase of life. So really, for me, that's the driving factor. That's the reason why I do it. It's great because I get to understand it. I talk to a lot of people day in, day out about property. We've got buyers agents that work with us. We've got sales agents, real estate professionals. We've got tax agents that work with us, and they're always talking about it, about this vehicle. And so for me, it's a no-brainer, is that if it works for thousands of these people that I work with, tens of thousands, should I say, it must work. So for me, it's a continuous ongoing process of learning about property. Where's a good place to buy? Where should I invest my money? How am I going to do that at the most accelerated rate, with a balance of being able to lend as well? Because now with, tightening restrictions on lending, we've got to balance it out in terms of, cash flow, and having that positive cash flow throughout all your properties, to not sort of subject yourself to, I guess, being, sort of lent out and not being able to borrow more money to continue your journey. So it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit more about the strategy behind what you've done in your portfolio and built that up as well. I know we touched on it that you're very keen on buying brand new property. That's definitely a plus there. But
Yeah.
what else has been the other parts of the strategy, like to actually build this portfolio?
Yeah. So buying somewhere, for me, there are areas, for example, where I've bought in towards Jordan Springs area in Austral. There are properties that are like Austral. You're trying to buy a property that is probably one of the most affordable ones in the area. And when you benchmark an area like Austral to an area, to the local suburbs, things like Liverpool, you've got good suburbs like Milton Grange, Leppington, Cecil Hills, Elizabeth Hills. These are really well-to-do suburbs. We're talking, averages are 1.2 to 1.3 million sal. And if you're talking about driving from these great suburbs, 5 minutes to 10 minutes to get to Austral, which is a thriving subdivision area, which is just full of new developments, and you think, well, maybe there's an oversupply. But then you look at the pricing of, like, if they're starting around 5 to 600, you think, well, it has all that room to grow. And for me, if I have that leverage to grow that much, similar to things like Kellyville, Kellyville's a surrounding suburb to those areas up in the northwest region. And if you can sort of leverage off that with cheaper, affordable lots there, you want to do that because it's got that room to get to that 1.2, $1.1 million price range. And that's where you want to be in 5 or to 10 years time. So this is where my philosophy is, trying to identify suburbs that are really well to do. People aspire to living there, checking out the vacancy rates, making sure that there's a high occupied rate there. Most people are owner occupied. Then you want to be around these suburbs. And that for me is really critical. And that's why, I've chosen some of these suburbs I have. And then to balance that off with, I also like to invest in places where I think there's because I think, rental yields are really important. So having that positive cash flow is important. And for what I realized when I first purchased our first commercial property, is that it drives so much yield. As much as I bought the premises in my personal, it was renting from the company. The company was renting the property off my trust. And so that would allow me to yield strong cash flow, because the amount of yield you get in commercial is crazy. I mean, for a $400,000 office, you could get something like $45,000 worth of rent a year. And that's what I'm getting at this stage now that I've rented out the old office and with the new tenants, which is amazing, which is exactly what you want to do. You want to be heavily positive geared where you can. And that's and for not everyone is able to do that, because the price of housing in Sydney is maybe expensive, but there are pockets, like I've seen thousands of my clients do. A lot of our clients are now moving out of Sydney. They're not buying in Sydney anymore. They're buying in good places like Tasmania with strong growth attributes. They're buying in places that are sort of south and southeast and even north, the Kippering area in Queensland. And they're buying in these areas because of positive cash flow. So it's a good balance between capital growth, what you can afford, and not sort of, shooting yourself in the foot there, but balancing out with these cheaper properties that have good positive growth and have good sort of positive yield. So, you get some strong rental yield in these areas, make sure that you're going to get good returns to then help you sustain more properties, because that's what it's all about. So having, I think, a good team is really important to do that.
Yeah, totally. And I that's what I really resonate with you, because what I just heard from the strategy that you've talked about, you've got a good balance there. You've got to have capital growth, which is buying the residential properties, in growth suburbs. And then on top of that, you've got your commercial properties, which gives you that positive. And then that basically helps it balance out, because ultimately we know, the yields in Sydney to purchase a property residential is like 2%, 3% return, maybe not even that sometimes nowadays.
Right.
And there's no way that you could obviously sustain exact putting more money back into that property. And it might be for years before you get that kind of growth. Whereas it sounds like with your commercial property, it's actually able to balance that by actually having positive cash flow, which also funds and keeps that property going. And I think that's really, really important, because you can't do without both, to be able to do that. So
Too
good
true.
point that you made there. And yeah, I agree with you on Kellyville side, because that's where I live. And, out there,
There
there's
you go.
plenty of properties there that,
Great
potentially
opportunities.
great
Yeah.
opportunities right now. And I mean, you think about it, how is it possible that 10 years ago, even when you think about it, there was pretty much just farmland all out here. And nowadays, all the properties, as you mentioned, just like out of Austral and so forth, are on average 1.2, 1.3 mil.
Yeah.
In Castle Hill the other day, I saw they were selling between 1.5 to 2 mil easily, for
Yeah.
rundown property.
Yeah.
So there's still so much potential around this area, and you just got to look further. So
Yep.
really, really good point there that you've mentioned about Sydney.
That's right.
Cool. All right. Well, let's jump into more now about the specific mindset side of things. We understand where you come from with your why and your drive behind purchasing property and so forth. I guess what I'm just looking for is now wanting to understand resources and mentors and stuff like that. Did you have any particular mentors that you worked with whilst actually building a portfolio, or any particular resources?
Yeah. I guess when it comes to resources, for me, my passion was, I mean, I started I started my journey out of the business because of purely wanting to start a business in property. I think for me, that ignition came from people like Napoleon Hill. I'm not sure people know, but Think and Grow Rich was a really important fundamental for me, because I didn't have that mindset. I was very blasé about life. 10 or so more so years ago, I was very casual about how things should be, how I wanted to see my life to be. And so then when you start taking interest in yourself and that realize that, you know what, I can't be like this. I've got to do something for myself, and I want to have a purpose to not in just my personal career, but spiritually as well. Like you want more from yourself, and then you listen to these people like Napoleon Hill and talk about it, and you think, well, it is amazing because it can transform you as a person. So those places are great places to start, especially if you're someone like me that found it very difficult to break through and find out your calling. And I did find it very tricky. So people like Napoleon Hill, Les Brown is amazing speaker. I love Les Brown because he's just awesome value and awesome energy. And having those people when you start out is amazing. But as you progress, I think as a property investor, when I started becoming a business owner and a good property investor, I needed to leverage off knowledge, people with good information. And the best way I found to do that was to go to places where they would educate you. So not going to these project marketing type environments, but more so going to, accounting firms. They would host property events. And if you could go to these type of venues and events, you learn a lot because all the information that you can gather from these places, they are very, very objective, and it's straight to the point, very informational. They're talking about the latest market data, what's happening in Perth, Sydney, Melbourne, what suburbs are great, and they tell you about the fundamentals. I remember going to one where, I went in there and, as a Vietnamese person, I understand the Melbourne market and the Vietnamese Melbourne market very well. And they were talking at an event in the city from a property expert, but also an accounting expert. They were talking about their own journeys and why they're buying in places like Sunshine, Footscray, and they are well-to-do suburbs. And had you bought in those properties 2 or 3 years ago when I was in these seminars, you would also do very well. So for me, it's having a very good team that surrounds you, that gives you the advice you need. And it's always very objective advice, unbiased, and having that team of, legal mortgage brokers that want the best for you. And that's where you want to reach out to as many people as you can to get the right advice. And where do you find these great mortgage brokers? The ones that partner up with these accounting firms, these property experts, and they go to places and then educate. And all they do is educate. And that's where I've learned a lot of my lesson, is that I go to places and I never sell. I never want to sell anything I do. All I do is I educate people about legislation. This is what the legislation or the tax rulings allow you to do as a property investor. And if I can interpret it to you and make you a better property investor, you will trust me to do what is right for you. And I think that's really important that everybody out there as property investors find that for themselves. Go out there, run the same journey, go through the same journey of finding a great team to surround them.
And I think that's the key thing, is that people trust a lot more people when you're not selling them something, because subconsciously, when you actually learn something from someone, you go, wow, I actually learned something. I will definitely keep that person in mind, and I'll go back to them when they actually provide great value. Whereas, there's a lot of people just saying, this is my service and that's it, end the story. And they just want you to buy their product. And I think that's the biggest change in a lot, because with technology, as we've talked about, and also with the current generation of accessing information so easily and at pretty much at our fingertips, we can find all this information out. But the thing is, we don't know which one is actually the right information that would be suitable for our circumstances. And when we do actually have the right person or the expert that can actually give us that information for our circumstance, that's when we go, wow, I trust that this expert is providing that information, and he's someone I definitely want to work with. So it's key in that sense. Knowledge is power, I think, and totally resonate with what you've just said there. So along your journey as well, do you have any particular mentors that you actually worked with over this period of time as well?
In terms of business-wise, I haven't had a lot of mentors. I am very much a person that wings things. It's strange enough to say, but I just purely I've always had people advise me. I've got a great group of mates that are in business, and they become my mentors per se. And there's a lot of people that are ahead of me that have been running their businesses, but I've started just going on my own journey, and I've tried to go down that path of mentors, but it's not something for me, because I think that for me, I don't know what's best, and nobody knows what's best for you, right? When it comes to mentorship. But I think people mentor you in their own way. You don't have to per se say exactly have one mentor or have someone ongoing, but catching up with someone, they become a mentor. You learn so much from them, and that same goes for me when it comes to property investing. The best mentors are the people that are doing it themselves. They're living the dream, right? They're getting in there. They're in there. They're stuck into it. They're always trying to leverage the next property, find out what to do, and so I have a host of people around me, quite a few people around me that invest in property and have a diversified portfolio. And I'm always talking to them about what are they doing in their lending side of things, their legal side of things, their structures, tax accountants. Having these people as friends, or just people that with really common interests in property, and that might be tax related or legal related, they will help you a great deal. And so for me, it's being able to meet clients on a day-to-day basis, and then really, like, people who are my clients, they're teaching me more about property than I am telling them about property. So, and that for me means that I can leverage off the knowledge, and having more knowledge is more power, as you say, Tyrone. So for me, that's really important. And same thing goes when you are looking for people that are you trying to walk this journey. Why there is no better thing to do than to go find someone that's already walked that journey, like the one that you want to take, and not to say that that's the right journey, but having an understanding of what they're going through, it gives you a great baseline as to where you should go and how you should, and what sort of journey you want to take. So I think these events and these places of gathering, a bit hard these days, but it is all online, is a great place to start. And of course, like, if anyone wants to reach out, I'm more than happy to share some of these places I go to as an advisor, but I go there as an advisor, but I go there as a property investor as well. And I get to listen, and I'm always learning about, the statistics of where people are buying, what percentage of vacancy rate is in this suburb at this time, because what makes it the best suburb. And like, there's nothing in it for these guys. These guys are well-to-do sort of property buyers agents or accountants, and they're living that dream and that journey. And I'm just getting value out of it, and I'm more than happy to share it with you guys out there who might be interested.
Nice. Yeah, I totally agree with that on that side of things. Great. Well, Tuan, let's take a step back and go, okay, if you met yourself, say, 10 years ago, what do you think you would have said to him?
Maybe The one thing that I was very always very subconscious about, very conscious about, is subconsciously always thinking about was, always concerned about what everybody is worried about me. Like everyone wants to know, okay, Tuan, are you doing well enough? You're doing this enough? There was a lot of pressure. There's always pressure in growing up, thinking, are you doing the right things, ticking the right boxes in life? So I think if I could go back and tell a 10-year-old, 10-year younger me, I would tell him, just care less, worry about your own journey, and stop looking elsewhere. Focus on the road ahead and doing what you love the most. And fortunately for me, I got to see that coming out 10 years ago at 24, 25. By the time I was 26 and worrying about my own thing, living my own life, I then came across things that I thought I was passionate about, resonated with me, and that's tax depreciation. It was something I think that as basic as it sounds, it it just resonated with me. It's something that I couldn't believe how much value it added in my life. Imagine, you talk about a $6,000 refund. It's not about that. It's not about this lump sum. It's about what $6,000 means to somebody. That's more than $100 a week in a year. I mean, having $100 extra a week every year is going to drive massive differences in people's lives, whether it's to pay bills, whether it's to save for the next investment property, for the next deposit, whether it's to, splurge and take your family on a holiday. I mean, that's the power of what I do. If I can help people unlock that knowledge of, wow, I've got this extra money, I can go so much further with it in my personal life, family life, financially. Great. That's what it should mean for you. And that's the power of what the ATO is providing here. And if I can share this with more investors, and this is where I go on to talks, and I go on to share on property sort of investing seminars, and talk about depreciation, and people can resonate, and that's great. I'm doing my part.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's look forward to the future. So what do you think you'd be looking forward and excited to in the next, say, 5 years?
So the next 5 years, we're on a very interesting journey. Tax Quantity Surveyors is now going to expand into also do property valuation. So the business is going to take into that sort of avenue, and so we're going to do property valuations as a Tax arm. So that's another very interesting part of our business that we're going to be looking into. But on top of that, what I want to do personally for my investing journey is start to look at how to not really expand my portfolio. I think if I've got this idea that with some planning involved, that I could forecast if I can start paying down some of these debts over time in the next 5 years to consolidate some of that debt. And look at longer term vision of trying to reduce debt, and then we can and then really be able to get a little bit closer to that retirement sort of goal. And that for me is important. So it's not always about accruing lots and lots of properties for me. I have something that's manageable, properties that I think are going to perform well and has a good balance of debt to sort of loan, and for me, I want that. I want that balance for me to have that passive, to have that income, that rental income that I'm getting from all these properties, by reducing some of that debt, but then also have some of that capital growth opportunity. If I could, I would then expand my portfolio within reason and managing that cash flow so it doesn't affect my lending too much. So that for me in the next 5 years is going to be really critical. So not so much about expansion, but I think some debt consolidation for me.
Right.
And I'm sure everyone has their own journey, but for me, that's where I'm sitting. Sound like an old man already, don't I?
Fantastic. Oh, it's fantastic advice. Honestly, I think it's the main principles, the foundations that you just talked about, and they're the hardest things because it's quite, consistency is keeping that going all the time and keeping focused and staying those. And we all want something new. That's the challenge that we face. But if you just focus on those fundamentals that you just talked about, those are the key things to being a successful property investor for the long term as well. So we've talked a lot about great things that you've achieved along your property journey, your business as well too. So how much of your success do you think, Tuan, is based on your skill, intelligence, and hard work? How much of it do you think has been of luck?
Great question, Tyrone. I think there's always a degree of fortune and luck per se, but I think I was very fortunate to have met or be a part of. I think at that time the fitting out of my mum's restaurant. I think I was very lucky to come across someone like that to then say, oh, you know what, like construction is where I want to be. I want to be in construction. And so part of that, I love numbers, and falling into construction, I was in estimating. And I was estimating to price work for, for projects, road works or bridges and things like that. So it's very interesting. And I had a lot of, but then as I evolved and I was more well-versed, I realized that, property was so important as an arm. And here I am, had a construction degree, experience in construction, and then applying that into property to drive wealth. I thought it was beautiful. Like I couldn't believe there was property tax and now construction all entangled into one. And I'm providing advice on all fronts. And it's been a blessing, fortunate. And when it comes to skill, you know what? Being an engineer, you don't have a choice but to be very good at spreadsheets and crunching numbers. So I was, being in the construction engineering role, it was natural to me to develop the tax depreciation software internally. So it's all developed in-house here at Duo Tax Quantity Surveyors. I was blessed to be able to prepare that, had the skill set to start a business out of it. I was a spreadsheet master. So my CRM here at Duotax was built on spreadsheets through Google Sheets with 5 or 6 employees using the same software. So it wasn't until probably the last 3 years. So I was using that for a couple of years before the system just shut itself. It just didn't work anymore. Google had to call me and say, mate, you're running a business out of a Google Sheet. I think this is not built for you. So we've gone on to then develop other software, things like Salesforce, to be implemented into our office, and so it's part of a journey, right? You're always learning, and to me, yes, there is a degree of luck. Everybody needs a degree of fortune and luck, but the rest, unfortunately, sorry to say, listeners, but yeah, if you want something so bad, you've got to work for it, and it's all hard work, and the amount of cold calling and door-to-door sales I've had to do to accountants and solicitors and real estate agents is what was really important to get me ahead, because it's and if you want things to grow that fast, you've just got to go and get it. And which leads me to, I think you've got one of the questions about some quotes. I'm more than happy to share some quotes.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, feel free to go for it. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I always preach here in the office is, if you do the things that others don't, you'll achieve the things that others won't. I think it's very important. So you got to do something very special, unique, and do the hard yards, I think. And that's what I'm really, put it down to. Doing the things that others don't is that you go out there, you search, and you search and you ask. And if you don't ask, the answer is always no. So very important to go out there and learn, for whether it's business or investing. If you don't ask, you don't know. And it's always good to ask. And I find that now, people that I knew before I started my business, there's more people out there that are willing to help you versus the people that you already know that will help you. So go out there and find those people. There are great people out there that you don't know yet, and they will give everything to you to help you get ahead.
Yeah, you got to be in it to win it.
That's
the saying I've heard so many times. It could be applied to anything, and I hear that a lot in lotto.
100%. Love it,
fantastic. All right, well, Tuan, it's been a pleasure to be able to have you on the episode today and share your story. And thank you so much for sharing a wonderful story. Let's end the episode with sharing with the audience what's the best way they can connect with you, and if they want to find out more about what you currently do.
Sure. Thanks, Tyrone. Guys, if you want to reach out to me, my email is tuan@duotax.com.au. If you want to reach out to me personally, feel free to give me a call as well. As my digits are 0455 282-565. I love chatting about property. I love chatting about business. So I'm more than happy to take any calls. But yeah, I leave you with that. In that, I hope that you've gathered something or gained some information today that is new and insightful. Thank you very much, Tyrone, for having us on today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure to be able to share your story. So thanks again.
Thanks, Tyrone.